Okay, so the name of this talk is Community is a Feeling, and it's a true story. On July 10th, 2011, I was staring in the classroom of my third grade elementary school. It was 5 in the morning, sunrise. I was by myself. My eyes were puffy from crying, and I was both physically and mentally shaken. The classroom amazingly looked exactly like I had remembered it from 40 years ago. And I thought at that moment, I really can go back in time, but I can't stay there. This is my story. 32 hours earlier, I was in North Raleigh when I got a phone call that my dad was in the hospital. And I was going to have to make my third trip up to see him last minute in the last 4 weeks. Dad moved to Orange, or he retired to a small town in the Berkshires of western Massachusetts called Orange, Massachusetts. Orange is an old, dying mill town. It hasn't been economically viable since about 1920. When you ride through the middle of town, it's decrepit, kind of sad. You kind of get a feeling of general dysfunction. And this is where my dad decided to retire. But it kind of made sense, really. This is where my dad grew up. He was born in 1932, and he had 20 wonderful years there. He talked about Orange all the time. So when he decided to move back, my parents were divorced after he retired. He said that he wanted to go back to that small town community. He wanted to go back to all the friends that he knew. And my brother and I were a little bit concerned about this decision, but supported it because we wanted Dad to be happy. Now, my dad tried to get involved in activities in Orange. He volunteered for boards. He tried to get involved with the museum. But sort of like that classroom that I was staring at that looked the same but wasn't the same because the community of people were different, of course, Orange had changed in 50 years, and my dad had changed. And he couldn't fit in with the community anymore. And slowly, he became less and less active. So this was a concern to my brother and I. The thing that you need to understand about my dad is that he is extremely stubborn, and he is gets very mean when sort of cornered. And I had tried, the only time I tried to insert myself into this retirement life was when I tried to argue kind of forcefully that I wanted to help with a certain situation, and he got so mad at me that we didn't talk for 3 months after that. But we got going back again, and my dad, I just decided I couldn't help my dad anymore. I decided that this was Dad's decision, that he didn't want any help, and he pushed me away so far that I decided if I wanted to keep my relationship with him strong, I had to back away. So 17 hours after I got that phone call, which was about the quickest I could get to the hospital where he was, because his location is so remote, when I walked into the hospital room, I was sad, of course, but resigned. I had begun mourning for my father around the time of that argument. He was lying on the bed unconscious. He had an oxygen mask on his face. And they said if I put my lips to his ears and spoke loudly that he would hear me. Dad, it's John. I'm in Orange. I love you. And suddenly, miraculously, his eyes opened, his shoulders lifted off the pillow, and I could tell he noticed me. I could tell the look in his face that he knew who I was, and he tried to speak to me, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. The words were unintelligible. And almost as suddenly, his eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he fell back on the pillow. And that was the last time I saw my dad conscious. He died 8 hours later, and I got a phone call. It was about 2 in the morning. My brother was traveling in China and couldn't get back. I was by myself. I couldn't go back to sleep, so I decided to get into my rental car and drive around Western Massachusetts. I had lived there for 30 years and knew the back roads real well, so I sort of chose to do something my dad was doing, which is to go back to places that I remembered growing up. I decided along the way that I would go to the town where I first grew up to drive back past the house that I grew up in. And along the way, I was listening to music, and the Eagles song, Into the Heart of the Matter, came on. And that song really hit me. That song's about forgiveness. And I didn't realize that I really needed to be forgiving at that moment. And I started crying during that song, and I repeated it over and over and over again for 30 minutes, even had to pull over at one point, crying heavily. Now, I'm not a crier. I hadn't cried like that, I don't think, in my life. But I have to tell you, it felt good. On my way to the house, I came across my first elementary school. And I pulled into the driveway and walked up and started looking in the window of my third grade class. And I was physically and mentally shaken. It looked exactly like I had remembered it. And I realized at that moment, I can go back in time, like my dad, but I can't stay there. I've got to keep moving forward. And I think my dad tried to go back in time, and I don't think he could build community. There's a line that Bob Dylan has that I thought was really apropos. I heard a few weeks ago. If you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. And I think that's what happened. Anyhow, I have a recording. Can I do the recording? All this to say that we do have to, I think we have to keep on moving forward, but we can't forget the past. And as an example, my dad left a message on my voicemail at work on the occasion of my birthday 2 years before he passed away. And it was so touching I recorded it, and I'm really glad I did, because it's a piece of the past, and it's the way I want to remember my dad. And I'm going to try to play that for you now. So bear with me, this is high tech.
Johnny, where are you, honey? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. I want to do this in person. I'll try you later. But if I don't, have a happy birthday. I love you dearly. Bye, hon.
End of message. To erase this message, press 7. To save it in the archives, press 9. Message returned to archive.
Thank you very much for listening.